Bix. What do you want to start with in this glorious week 2 of our show?
I mean, we got a whole lot to talk about
Right.
this week, like you mentioned. But we got to start with the World Series.
We have to. I mean, it's the longest combined drought in World Series history, in MLB's history. We got the Chicago Cubs and the surprise wild card, the Cleveland Indians.
Yep, these are two teams that have a combined 174-year drought between World Series berths. So you better believe that they're both going to be itching to get that title under their belt.
That's right. The World Series kicks off tomorrow, Tuesday, October 25th. I'm really looking forward to this one. I think if you've watched our show before, if you've watched last semester, whatever, you know that Bix is more of the MLB guy. I think that's fair to say, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But I am genuinely interested. I plan on watching every game of this series, every inning, and I really hope it's going to be one of those classics that we talk about forever.
Yeah, it's going to be a great one, and with that, I kind of want to start breaking down the chances of both of these teams. Right now, the Cubs are the favorites in Vegas. That being said, I did place a couple of bets on the Cleveland Indians today. I think they're going to come out on top in 6 games. Kay, what are your predictions?
Yeah, as you mentioned, the Cubs are favorite. They're almost 1-2 favorites. So if you would have bet $1, you'd only get like 50 cents back. So that's pretty heavy in the world of money line baseball. But that, Vegas bets aside and all that, that really just shows what the public thinks who's going to win. That's really important. I think a lot of people want to bet on the Cubs because it's the Cubs. Like, it's just too magical a situation not to let go of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, these guys haven't made the World Series since 1945. Just a couple of funny things for you. Here are some of the things that were invented from the last time that the Cubs made the World Series until today. The NBA wasn't a thing.
Neither was the NFL.
Neither was the NFL. Sliced bread didn't exist. Microwaves didn't exist. I mean, you name it.
The states of Alaska and Hawaii were not states.
Oh yeah, we had 48 states the last time the Cubs made the World Series. So this is truly historic. I mean, Chicago was going crazy when the Cubs finally clinched against the Dodgers. Speaking of which, that was a little bit of a surprising game. Kershaw kind of fell through for the Dodgers.
And that's just another reason why I believe it was kind of meant to be for these Cubs to make the World Series, and I picked to win it. Honestly, if you were a straight-up analyst of the MLB looking at the last 2 games in this NLCS matchup, you would pick the Dodgers. I would pick the Dodgers. It just seemed like they had the advantage on pitching, and they had the advantage on batting as well. But here we are, the Cubs and the Indians. Now let's pivot a little bit from Chicago to Cleveland. Believeland, is it well and alive? I mean, this season's been Cleveland's year, not in terms of football, but in pretty much everything else.
Yeah, it's great to be a sports fan in Cleveland right now. Like you said, maybe minus the Browns, who are struggling a little bit. We'll get into that as we touch on the NFL a little bit later in our show. But yeah, between the Cavs and the Indians, man, Cleveland's having a good time right now.
That's right. It's the first time they've advanced since 1997. So obviously there is a drought there for them as well, just around 20 years. But do they have the depth and the pitching relief to go forward and win this World Series?
Oh, they absolutely do. And you go back and look at some of the teams that the Indians had in the 90s, and yeah, maybe those teams were flashier and came off better and seemed like they were stronger teams, but really what's gotten the Indians to this point in their season is their depth. They have so many good players out there right now. You could throw anyone anywhere, and when you have the pitching staff to back that up, they're a little banged up as it comes to starting pitchers, but when you look at a bullpen that can go 8 1/3 and do as well as the Indians have done, it just seems like they're unstoppable.
It does. And this next week, just looking at all of sports is going to be probably the biggest week in sports of the year. It usually is when the World Series is going on. The NFL is in full swing. MLB, the NBA starts. The NHL is in full swing. competing with all these other sports, do you think the World Series gets the ratings it deserves to get? Do you think so many people, even casual sports fans, are going to tune in because it's like the Cubs and the Indians?
Oh, it's going to get great ratings this year. Indians playing two teams that aren't usually in it, and generally across the country, the Cubs are or have been referred to as lovable losers. But now that they're actually playing well and getting a shot at a title, you better believe that people will be tuning in. This is going to be probably one of the most watched World Series, I would argue, in recent memory.
I'd have to agree with you there. To be honest, like I'd mentioned, I'm a casual baseball fan, hardcore sports fan. I couldn't name the last 3 matchups in the World Series, but the Cubs and the Indians have really captured my attention. Honestly, though, even if it was the Cubs and the Blue Jays, it would have been just as interesting. But I think the fact that it's Believe Land and it's 2016, that also holds a great bit of attention for me.
Oh, absolutely. And I just want to delve into the keys a little bit for each team. How do you think the Cubs win this series?
Aside from the intangibles, they have the important thing is that they've been healthy and they have the right amount of the right balance of pitching and pitching relief. So when you look at the Cubs, what's the first name that comes to your mind?
It's got to be Chris Bryant for me, USD alum. Little shout out to him. Good luck. Sorry I'm not picking the Cubs to win, but wish you all the best if you're listening out there somewhere.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I think of Chris Bryant as well, but they have so many key players. I mean, for example, I believe the MVP of the NLCS was won by 2 Cubs players, if I'm not wrong.
I believe so. I believe it was Javi Baez,
yes.
And I'm blanking on the other winner, maybe John Lester.
Yeah, I am too. It's okay, we're not professionals. But that's kind of my point. They have so many key players there, and they have just the right amount of balance between all levels of the game, and I think that's what wins them, the World Series. And they have Bill Murray on their side. That's
always
big
great
reason.
to have Bill Murray. You see him crash the White House press conference the other day?
That's right.
He crashed the president's briefing.
He was in tears the other night when they clinched.
That was great. But no, the Cubs do absolutely have a great shot at winning the World Series. I think when you have an offense like that, especially when you get guys like Addison Russell going and Anthony Rizzo that have been uncharacteristically quiet during the postseason, they have a great chance. And also, something that's interesting, saw a couple reports this week, Kyle Schwarber, a guy that we really haven't heard his name since the beginning of the season. Mm-hmm. If you guys remember, he got hurt and was out basically all season. Reports of him maybe making an appearance in the World Series. What do you think about that?
Honestly, just stepping back, I think it's the wrong move. I think that they've, I've been stressing balance for the last 2 minutes, but it's a big key to why the Cubs have made it this far. Of course, Kyle Schwarber is a big name to come back because he was lost in week 2, week 3 of the season.
Yeah, really early.
So the fact that it was like ages ago in terms of this season is a big reason why I don't want him back in the World Series because the pressure's high, and it would have been a different story if he would have come back at the beginning of the playoffs to have time to acclimate. People knew that the Cubs were going to make it pretty much this far. But to have them right at the beginning of the World Series, where they have to, face their toughest matchup in 100 and something years, and especially this season, I don't think it's the right move. I don't know if Kyle Schwarber would agree, though. Obviously, he wants to get.
I'm sure he'd love to be back.
Right, but he would love the ring a little bit more, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm kind of torn on this issue because he's such a great hitter, and maybe in like a pinch hit capacity, you could bring him back, and he would be a great asset to have. But also, like you mentioned, you don't want to mess with the team chemistry. These guys have been playing so well together all year round, and you don't want to throw anything in there that might mix things up. Okay, I know that I'm a very superstitious guy, especially when it comes to baseball. So, as much as I love Kyle Schwarber, I might lay off this one, despite the fact that he is such a talented player.
Right. Okay, so before we move on, you brought this up in our pre-show coverage. Jose Fernandez, looking back, he said that these were the 2 toughest lineups he had ever faced. A little bit, of an eerie feeling, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was a crazy report. For those of you that saw it, it came out this week that in a conversation with D. Gordon, Jose Fernandez did, like you say, mention that the Indians and the Cubs were the toughest lineups he had to face in baseball. So, yeah, just, funny how things kind of work out. It's interesting. But one thing I really wanted to mention as we're finishing up our coverage of the World Series here is, Kay, I know you're big into checking out how the media covers such big events like this, especially when it comes to playoffs in any sport and their title games. I just wanted to get your thoughts quickly on how baseball has handled the coverage of the playoffs, because they've kind of split things between Fox Sports 1 and MLB.TV if you get coverage on there. And to me, I mean, especially as such a big baseball fan and a college student who can't always pay for some of these different areas to watch the game, that gets kind of difficult. I know the World Series will air on Fox, on their official station. You can also get it on MLB.TV if you are a subscriber. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've always been really critical of this, Bix, because, you said it right there. If you want to get the millennials involved, if you want, like you and me, if you want to get the college students, people younger, a little older as well, you can't be trying to make us flip through these channels because, one, most likely a lot of us don't even have a cable subscription anymore, and two, I've kind of been critical of FS1. They've gotten a lot better now. I do have Time Warner Cable, so it's a little easier for me to find these channels. But
for fact, Time Warner Cable, who is reportedly being acquired by AT&T to the tune of $80 billion.
Oh, man, you got to catch up with that. That deal's already done. $85 billion signed and done.
That's unreal.
Unreal. Let me get a little bit of that money. What I'm saying is, I've had Dish back home, back in Tennessee, and I couldn't even find FS1 to save my life. Apparently you have to pay extra for it, and I don't even get me started on MLB.TV. I don't think it's the right move. I see what they're trying to do there, but, just get those TV rights and make it a little bit more accessible. That's why I like what the NBA has done. They're on big channels, TBS, the Turner Broadcasting Network, CBS and ESPN. So I am critical of that. Like I said, like you said, there will be on Fox, luckily for the World Series, but I don't know. Maybe going forward, the new commissioner can address that so we can get more fans back.
Yeah, so final word from us on the World Series. Okay, we got Kluber going against Leicester, Game 1. Who you got leading off the series? And give me your predictions for the series as a whole.
Where are they playing the first game?
They are playing the first game in Cleveland as the AL won the All-Star game this year.
All right, interesting. See, I like that rule, actually. It's really interesting.
I do, too. It gets a lot of criticism, but I'm a fan. It gives meaning to a game that would otherwise have no meaning. And we've seen with things like the NFL Pro Bowl that's not always a good thing if there's no meaning to an All-Star game.
But going back, I would. I'm gonna take Cleveland in the first game, and then I'll have Chicago evening out before going back to Wrigley and getting it done in Wrigley. So I got them winning in 5? I got them winning in 5.
Wow.
Chicago Cubs
Dropping Game 1 and then winning the next 4.
That's right.
All right, Chicago in 5. I've got Cleveland in 6. I think it's going to be a hard-fought series, but Believeland is alive and well.
It is 2:45 on the dot right here in San Diego, California. Not so sunny today, but we are still the sunny state. You're listening to Bix and K on USD Radio, UofSDmedia.com, my Facebook, your Facebook. Hey, your beautiful family, they can't see me. You got to move that mic back
there we go. Well, sorry, I didn't
go.
quite catch that. We'll mess
go.
with this a little bit.
That's right.
There you go. Now you guys can see Kay. Thank you, by the way, to everyone that is tuning in on Facebook Live. It's a really cool new thing we're trying out this year. Week 1, it went great. We loved all the feedback we got from you guys. And comment. Ask us questions. Just let us know what you're thinking. We'll talk about it on the show, give you a little shout-out. Makes the dynamic a little more fun, and we get to get in some of your guys' head a little bit. So,
that's right.
Yeah, give us your feedback.
Yeah, I had a couple people come up to me and they were like, "Hey, I saw you on the Facebook machine." I was like, "That's pretty cool. I'm into it."
Has Facebook been around that long that it's starting to become obsolete?
That's right. Anyway, moving right on. The National Football League, they had a pretty interesting week this week, but I think none more interesting then the primetime game last night. Man, Seattle versus Arizona. If you haven't heard about it, just check any local sports station or ESPN.com. What a ride that was.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about in a game that featured no touchdowns on either side of the ball.
That's right.
This is, I believe, the first time since overtime rules were created in the NFL that no team has scored a touchdown in a game that ended in a tie, which is unbelievable.
It is. And, okay, so there's two sides of the ball that the media is kind of going on. One, they were saying it's one of the worst games ever played. Two, a lot of people were saying it was one of the best games ever played. What are your thoughts on that initial reaction on this Monday?
I got to go with the worst game ever played. I mean, yeah, I know it got exciting at the end and whatnot, but for 56 minutes of this game, nothing happened. I just I feel like I spaced out and, I don't know, zoned out and just missed everything, and I come back, there's 5 minutes left in the game, 4 minutes left in the game, and it's 3-0 Arizona. I mean, yeah, there were a couple block kicks here and there, and Seattle tied it up at the end, which made overtime intriguing to watch, but that was a pretty awful game of football.
It was pretty bad, but you know what? I'm not going to go as far as to say it was one of the best games ever played, but it was definitely one of the more entertaining games ever played. And I know what you're saying. There's no touchdowns in this day and age. How can it be entertaining?
It did feature a couple top defenses.
Which
you're not expecting a high scoring game, but
yeah, and it's not going to be reflective of the ratings because of the fact that there was two West Coast teams. So a lot of the East Coast guys, they clocked out. They were done. They didn't want to watch this game, and I don't blame them. Obviously, the fan bases of Seattle and Arizona, respectively, probably watched that game to the end. I watched it because I was just waiting for something to happen. And I ended up, at the end of the game, just kind of screaming at my TV. It was
a little money on the line there.
It was a little journey, you know what I mean? It's going to, when we look back at the end of the season, as most of the major networks usually do, ESPN, Fox Sports, they usually do that best of or, highlights of the NFL season. This game is definitely going to come in mind, and I think there's always that one game in the regular season every year. Flashback to a few years ago when the replacement refs messed up that Packers Hail Mary. That was that game. This is this game.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Kay. Who is this tie worse for? The Seattle Seahawks, the Arizona Cardinals, or the NFL?
Ooh.
Their big primetime Sunday night game ending in a 6-6 tie.
Right.
Granted, it's between two good teams, but
it's got to be Arizona. It's got to be worse for Arizona. They were like what 2-1 on the total yardage, time of possession. They were 2-1. Like that's an like with those games. Chris Collinsworth said it best last night. Usually teams are up by 20, 28, 35 even.
And I believe Arizona actually clinched the time of possession win by the end of the third quarter.
That's right.
So 45 minutes into the game, they had more than 30 minutes of possession.
Right, and they were playing at home. You had an injured still Russell Wilson. You had a weak running game, a weak offensive line for Seattle.
And I think that was overlooked a little bit. The
Yeah.
fact that Russell Wilson couldn't move, essentially. I think he had something like 2 carries for -2 yards in the entire game. That's not characteristic of him, and it just leaves you wondering what would have happened if he was able to scramble a little bit. I know he wasn't completely incapacitated, but, that's kind of his deal.
That is. And, you're right. That's one of his attributes. And I think a bigger thing is that offensive line is looking a lot weaker. I mean, they have a couple rookies starting on that line. They've been playing okay for the Seattle Seahawks, but they've not been playing great.
And both O-lines kind of deteriorated when it came down to the end of the game. I mean, quarterbacks were getting hit left and right, be it Palmer or Wilson.
Right. And obviously, we can't even get into the special teams. That's kind of the whole factor of this game. I see your point as to why it would be bad on the NFL's part, because those ratings are going to go down, and everybody looks to the NBC product as the number one product in the NFL. I think you'd agree with that as well. But it's being talked about a lot. So I don't know.
Yeah, and
it's
now
got to be Arizona though at the end.
Let's get to the end of this game a little bit with the kickers. Now, for those of you that didn't get a chance to watch the game, both teams got deep into overtime, and it looked like the Cardinals had wrapped up the win. Richard Sherman got beat. I forget which receiver beat him for Arizona, but Arizona essentially had the ball inside the 5-yard line. And David Johnson couldn't quite punch it in, but that leaves the Cardinals with a chip shot field goal. Catanzaro misses, bangs it off the post. And then the Seahawks go down the field. They look in control. Doug Baldwin makes a nice catch, beats the Honey Badger, Tyrann Mathieu, gets Seattle down inside the 5, and their man, Steven Hauschka, misses his shot, pulls it left. So both coaches were obviously asked about their kicking games after the game, and the Cardinals, granted, have had more issues with Catanzaro than the Seahawks have had with Hauschka. But I wanted to get your take, Kay, on what both coaches said, because Pete Carroll, head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, took a stance saying, you know what, we love Hauschka, he's my guy, we're going to support him, all that kind of stuff. Now, this is the first big kick he's missed all year, okay, but on the other side of the ball, you got Bruce Arians for the Arizona Cardinals saying, you get paid to make it, in reference to Catanzaro.
Right.
So, whose side do you fall on, do you think?
Bruce Arians. It shows the polarizing, the dynamic of the two coaches, right? So you got Pete Carroll, definitely a West Coast guy, was in the Pac-12 for a long time, very easygoing, but very like a cheerleader type of situation. You got Bruce Arians, hard-nosed football, coming from the Steelers camp back in the day. I kind of lean with Bruce because, you know what, I think for a guy like Chandler Catanzaro, who's in a contract year, that's going to be big for him to sort of as a motivation factor. And there was another struggling big-time kicker in the league this week, Steven Gostkowski, and he said he was playing like crap, and that was his words. And Bill Belichick said, you know what, you just got to make those kicks, and I think he's going to be fine. So you can take that example and really transfer it to how Bruce Arians plays his game with a guy like Catanzaro, and I think Catanzaro is going to make some clutch field goals going forward.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with you on this one because I understand where both coaches are coming from, but even though at least most of the people back home know that I am not a big Pete Carroll fan necessarily, being a Niner fan, and especially having watched him since he was at USC, I've always been a big Stanford fan. My mom graduated from Stanford, so we've always supported them. So this kind of Harbaugh-Pete Carroll rivalry has been brewing for a while. All that to be said, I'm going to side with Carroll on this one. I think his approach is the way to go in this case, and I think Arians was especially hard for the Cardinals on Catanzaro, which isn't good for a young kid. You look at Carroll, who comes out and says, he's our guy, he's putting confidence in his kicker, he's going to get it turned around, he's a professional. I think Catanzaro will turn things around too, but especially for Chandler, who's such a young guy, you want to instill confidence in your kicker. I know he's cost you 1 or 2 games early on in the season. I think the Cardinals are still going to make the playoffs. They lost to teams or tied teams like the Seattle Seahawks and the New England Patriots, teams that are NFL powerhouses. So I don't think it's anything to worry about right now. Yes, Catanzaro is going to have to sort things out, but I think Pete Carroll's got the right mentality in pumping his kicker up, giving him confidence, so the next time he goes out there, he's not thinking about what his coach said about him in the media the week before.
They also both lost to the Rams, so
that's an anomaly.
That's right. I don't know how that happens. Anyway, I see your point, and we'll see what happens going forward. But there were a ton of other games to talk about. Do you have one in mind that you'd like to get into?
Speaking of the Rams, they played over in London this week against the New York Giants. They lost that game after Case Keenum threw 4 picks, 3 of which came on the final 3 drives of the game. And first question has to be the one on everyone's mind.
That's right.
Rams going into a bye week. In 2 weeks, is Jared Goff their starter?
Well, he should be. he won't be because it's Jeff Fisher. And that says a lot about the Rams organization. The fact that Jared Goff is not going to start until probably like week 12, honestly, unless Case Keenum just totally palms. And even then, I think Jeff Fisher still gives him like 3 weeks to work on it.
I think he sticks with him too.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Goff should start. You're right, but I don't know that that's going to happen. They don't want to throw him in there right now. I think now would be the time.
It would be.
Case Keenum got his shot, but I don't know. I guess I'm not an NFL coach. That being said, Jeff Fisher is, I believe, 5 losses away from leading the NFL in all-time losses by a coach.
That's right. And, you know, that is what is interesting is that this week they do have their bye week. So, I mean, Jeff Fisher's already come out and said that Case is our guy, which he shouldn't have. That was a bad publicity move. It just lost a lot of people's interest in a big market like LA now. Mm-hmm. But, you know, you have a week and a half, about 2 weeks to kind of figure out, you know, going forward, how are we going to work with Case? But ultimately, this shouldn't even be a question. You know, and we're going to see what happens. But according to the rumors out there, Jeff Fisher's already won a contract extension for next year, which is absolutely unbelievable. I mean, I need his attorney. I need his lawyer, his agent.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how the Rams finish out this season because I do agree with you that contract seems intriguing, for lack of a better word. I know it's their first year in LA. There's going to be some growing pains. The Rams aren't the best team in the world right now. So I think next year will be more telling. And no matter what happens with his contract, I think after next year, it'll kind of be a make-or-break situation for Fisher. But right now, the Rams are headed in the wrong direction after starting off pretty strong, minus the loss to the 49ers in their season opener. So we'll just have to keep track on them, keep tabs on them throughout the season. But yeah, that four-pick performance from Keenum was not confidence instilling.
Yeah, you can say that again. Okay, now moving on to another quarterback situation in the NFC. The Cowboys, they're coming off a bye. They play the Philadelphia Eagles on Sunday Night Football this week. Is it Dak or Tony? I mean, a lot of people have been asking that question, but let me hear the one answer.
I want Dak. Give me more Dak, honestly. Because it's just not the time for Tony Romo to come back. The Cowboys are rolling right now. You got a rookie that's stepped into things. It feels like he's grown up, 10 years in the 6 or 7 weeks he's been in the NFL. He's playing so well. Like I said, the Cowboys are on a roll. I don't see why you switch this up. Yes, Tony Romo is the veteran coming back. You're not going to trade him in the middle of the season right now. But why not let Dak keep rolling until he hits a roadblock? If he hits a roadblock, then you got the veteran Tony Romo to bring in. You have confidence in him. He's had a couple weeks back to kind of be around the players once again and get into a groove. And if Dak hits a wall, then yeah, throw Tony Romo in there and salvage your season. But with Dak rolling the way that he is, you got to stick with him.
I like that take. But knowing it's the Cowboys, it'll probably be Tony because of the whole legacy factor that we talked about last week on the show. Now, moving forward, it is 3 o'clock on the dot. I don't know how I keep doing that. I just keep looking at the clock, and it's right on there. Here on the West Coast, you're listening to Bix and K on USD Radio, UofSDmedia.com, and Facebook Live.